The historical phenomenon that has most influenced my life is the Beatles. When I was 12, the flourish of pre-Sgt. Pepper 20th anniversary promotions brought my previously merely peripheral enjoyment of their music into the spotlight of my sixth-grade brain. And after listening to the many radio shows about the celebrated album, I began to realize how a musical group had the power to influence so much more than just a faceless radio audience. Indeed, I was fascinated with the idea that these sometimes sentimental, sometimes outrageous, sometimes witty songs and the personalities behind them had the power to create that kind of hysteria and to inspire so much creativity and controversy. Since there didn't seem to be much else to do in town at the time, I began to dedicate a seemingly exorbitant portion of my life to learning more about the Beatles' music and what their social impact really meant. I read tens of thousands of pages of books and magazines and pamphlets, sat through hundreds of hours of videos and movies and TV snippets and radio documentaries. I even attended Beatles conventions, kind of like those Star Trek cons everyone likes to make fun of. All this in addition to, of course, listening to countless hours of music by the Beatles and their protege. And then there's the merchandise. In middle and high school, swept up in the passion of good old American consumerism, I amassed a ton of what can only be accurately described as, well, stuff. T-shirts, mugs, figurines and banks, posters upon posters, bubblegum cards and calendars, etc., etc., etc. And don't forget the pièce de résistance, the dolls. Just a whole lot of semi-useless stuff, all sporting the images of my idols. Yep, I was pretty obsessed. I remember at one point in middle school, when we learned the term one-track mind, a friend quipped, "Hey Gwyneth, you've got a one-track mind." To which I promptly replied, "No, I've got a four-track mind. John, Paul, George, and Ringo." I thought I was pretty funny. To some people, my Beatlemania probably seems obsessive and pathetic, and to an extent I'd have to agree. But this obsession has also taught me a lot of things that my teachers never got around to teaching. Because of the Beatles, I was proud that I could understand the King's English, or at least British slang, better than any other 7th grader in my class. Since once you read every Beatles book in the library, you reflexively start reading everything related, I quickly became capable of giving an on-the-spot explanation of the evolution of rock and roll music and still 60s social and political movements. And since humor is such an integral part of the Beatles' appeal, I followed yet other connections in their history and quickly became familiar with the inspirational work of comedy troupes such as Monty Python and the Bonzo Dog Band. Also, among other historical references, thanks to the Paul McCartney song Jet, I learned what a suffragette was, even though we never got around to discussing the women's vote in history class. Most importantly, though, was the impact that the Beatles had on my understanding of the many nations and peoples of the world. It goes without saying that the Beatles were a worldwide sensation. After all, they were more popular than Jesus. But what it's done on me was the global effect of their music. Stories of the revolutionary joy bought by bootleg copies of the White Album to youth in communist Russia. Stories about scandals when the Beatles toured countries like Japan and the Philippines. Stories of the diversification of spiritual consciousness that occurred when George Harrison picked up the sitar and journeyed to India with his celebrity pals. Having grown up in a, shall we say, less than cosmopolitan area of the world, these anecdotes were my first exposure to foreign lands, and my drive to overcome my ignorance and to better understand the ramifications of these stories was probably the original reason why I've spent most of my time studying different cultures. But the fatality of the British invasion paled when this led to my discovery of British imperialism. In my naivete, I found it somewhat ironic that the same nation that produced the Beatles was also the major economic empire that for centuries trampled nations around the globe, leaving a trail of broken cultures and economic hardship in its wake. I was suddenly struck less by anecdotes about Beatleific global unification, and more often by individual stories of economic disparities in countries, officially colonized or not, that had for centuries been pillaged by European greed. And although the Beatles certainly weren't diplomats of the imperialist cause, this discovery still bothered me. I had to trace my steps back to see where this connection began, and found it in the stuff. I recall a story of a woman in rural China who accepted a job offer from Mattel Toys with a promise that she would earn several times as much as she did in her parents' store in the city and would be able to provide better for her family. She survived the hellish and terminal bus trip to the city, but when she arrived, she did not earn the wages she was promised. She could not afford the bus trip back to her village, however, so she was forced to work indefinitely for 19 hours a day in sweatshop conditions at one task, inserting the hair into the heads of Barbie dolls. And I began to wonder, was my stuff created in the same manner? Did someone like that stitch the hair on Paul? Did someone like that paint Ringo's eyes? Did someone like that attach the glasses to John's face? Did someone like that braid the tassels on George's jacket? This isn't to say that this distracts from my enjoyment of the music of the Beatles. or my appreciation of their humor, or their significance to history. But it does make me think about the significance of history, and how not only the Beatles, but everything also has a history.